So now I am pleased to welcome our first keynote of the day. Gabo Arora is an award-winning emerging technology pioneer, professor, entrepreneur, and former UN diplomat. Gabo's keynote will chart the journey forward in getting technology to a place where it exercises our hearts as much as of our minds. Please welcome Gabo.
All right. Thank you for coming this early in the morning to hear me speak. And I was just saying it's been a while because I've been doing so many Zoom talks, and it's good to be back on the stage. And it's great to be back at Games for Change. I was here in 2017, and I was able to really see this movement from the ground up come into being. And it's been really beautiful to see all the progress, and I'm really happy for Games for Change, and they're just a wonderful partner. So I'll try not to bore you too much. This talk, is going to be a little bit about where we're headed, where we are, where we've been. And I see one of my students here, which is amazing, from Johns Hopkins. At Johns Hopkins, the first thing I make everyone read in a department dedicated to emerging technologies and immersive storytelling is the Unabomber's Manifesto. And many people find that to be quite shocking, and a lot of those ideas are very shocking. And the reason I bring it up, and I want to start with that, and why we start with that in the MA program I've started at Johns Hopkins, is that while I don't condone the violence, I do think a lot of the ideas in that manifesto are becoming more relevant today than they were in 1995 when they were printed in the Washington Post and the New York Times. And I say that because the central premise of that sort of manifesto is that technology can never be reformed, that the only way forward is to destroy technology and civilization. And those sound like the ideas of a crazy person, but I think it's important in what we do, because we're working with emerging technologies, to understand that there is always going to be a growing group of people who, if we don't solve a lot of the problems we see in technology today, who are going to find these ideas to be a lot more seductive. So we have to work to prove the Unabomber wrong. But I remember when I first experienced this, I was 18 in 1995, and when I first experienced this manifesto, it made me step back and actually think about what progress is. And just as an aside, one of my favorite performance artists is Tino Segal, who made an amazing performance art piece in the rotunda of the Guggenheim, where you start out at the bottom, and there's an 8-year-old girl that asks you, what is progress? You walk up the rotunda, you meet a 20-year-old, you meet a 40-year-old, you have this conversation as you go up to the rotunda about life and progress. And I think it's important to never forget those types of things, of what is progress in everything that we're trying to do. So where are we now? This is from the Odyssey. This is Odysseus, and it's a very famous scene in the Odyssey where he knows he's going to be seduced by the sirens and the seas, so he asks himself to be tied to the mast, to be completely unable to be, even in some photos he's blindfolded, so that he can get through where he needs to go without being distracted. And I think in this day and age now, we are living in a way that I do feel like Odysseus myself. At home, my Wi-Fi router goes off at 9 p.m. so that we know we can go to bed and not binge Netflix forever. We work very hard to not have an iPad for our son in a restaurant. We think about never having laptops in bed. I'm always trying to get through the day without technology making it more difficult. And I think what that is saying is that the tech creators of today have not thought about my well-being and my health, and they're not. It's getting more and more complicated. But there's ways around it. This is where I promote the Light phone. Out of the Brooklyn Navy Yards, the New York creator, the remarkable tablet. There is a burgeoning sort of creator group that is trying to solve problems with new technologies. And these are not related to spatial computing or VR or AR, but if there's one advice I'd give is that a lot of what we do in building the XR experiences that we do is to solve those problems, to think about how we can get to a better future, because it really is not where we need it to be. Now, when we started in working, and when I started working in this field, I was at the UN, and I joined an incredible creator class, many of you who are here as well. Our experiences, though we might have started in storytelling, we might have started it so that we were so excited by a new artistic medium. Actually, because of the beginnings of spatial computing going mainstream, gives us a seat at the table and really brushes us up against these future issues of technology and the future of humanity. You might not have thought this was what it was about, but this is what it's becoming. A little bit about my work. I, though, have a complicated relationship with technology. I love it, although I don't like it. And I say that because when Leon Wieseltier had to describe Susan Sontag, he'd say, I love Susan, but I don't like her, because Susan was mean a lot, She's kind of like, was a fierce person. And that's how I feel with technology. I love it, but it has a lot of things that are very difficult. But my sort of North Star, my sort of way of moving forward was to try to infuse these technologies with artistic expression and social impact. I've seen this technology make people cry. I've seen these technologies double donations for the UN. I've seen these technologies change perspectives forever. And so there is a lot here that I think is incredible. My first experience, Clouds Over Sidra, which I made in 2015, continues to be used to this day by the UN to advocate for refugees worldwide. So when we get it right, it can be quite incredible. I often think what the Unabomber would have thought of Clouds Over Sidra. I hope he would have liked it. So, as I said, there is a lot that I'm aware of, that everything is very troubling about technology. AI could kill us. Social media is manipulative. There are all these sort of things that I think are really difficult. But I don't despair, because if you bring in artistic expression, I think you're going to be in the right path. This is just a short video that I wanted to play about Clouds Over Sidra.
What's actually going on? Oh. Video, it really makes you think what's actually going on.
So that's all great, but why work in XR? It's so hard. It's so hard. Funding is so difficult, distribution is uncertain. If you choose to go in it, it's a real heartbreak. But we continue. I put up Martin Scorsese there because when I started in 2015, I studied filmmaking also at NYU. I thought I was going to be the Scorsese of XR. I might still be, but it doesn't mean anything in the way it does. But the reason what's exciting that's happening is that when you look at technology's role for impact, it can go either way. Really, Obama wouldn't probably be in power if he wasn't able to have micropayments in the internet that he did in 2008. But in the same way, new technologies it's a double-edged sword. You have Donald Trump, who is very ingenious with his use of Twitter. And you could say that without Twitter, there'd be no Donald Trump. So when we do get it right, and it's not always possible. We don't always succeed. It is very hard. You are dealing with a new technology, you have to think about stories, you have to think about emotions, you're creating things that have never been created before. But I think we continue, because when we do get it right, and there's a lot of studies, there's a lot of things that have come out, the emotions are deeper, the impact is greater, and the scale is enormous. So just a little bit of the answer of what I think is probably the leading way we can get out of our little technology malaise or anti-technology sort of situation that we're in right now that I think has grown increasingly since I started in 2015 working in this sort of field. We really need to get very different people working in these technologies. And Susanna had mentioned Who's Metaverse that we're partnering together on. And what that really does is create a community. And it's a community like this one that's incredible. We really need to demystify it. We need other people coming together. These are my OG friends. There are many more. But Chris Milk was a music video director. Nani is a journalist. I was a UN diplomat. Edward Saatchi was in politics. Before we all came together from those diverse perspectives to do and make the exciting world of VR and XR that we're in today. And I think that type of diversity now needs to go to people who are underserved, who are underprivileged. And it shouldn't just be seen as charity. It's a way we actually get to an inclusive future and the way we actually make this work. So you can find out more at whosmetaverse.org, but I wanted to play a little video from Harlem of where we have this pilot project trying to get young people to basically start being the creators today and of tomorrow. Great. And yes, electronic music was my midlife crisis, as that soundtrack has it. Just a little bit, this is my father. He came to this country in the early 70s. I can't be on the New York Times stage and not think about him. He read the New York Times every day, and that's how he learned English. And he studied and did his graduate studies at NYU. My father, was very important for me for many reasons. He was an engineer, but he didn't want me to be an engineer because he said, that's really boring because I didn't come to America for you to do the same thing you would probably have done if we were in India. Because in India, it's a little bit more, some things around caste, but I think a lot of things around just how it works there is much easier to go into the profession of your parents. So when it was time to buy a computer, my dad was very adamant not to get me a computer that would make me into an engineer. He got me a computer that did very little and actually had very little utility and really was more about the vision of humanities and creative expression. And I think my father, really chose well in 1985 when he had to buy our first computer. And though I couldn't do a lot with it, it did something to me. I think the intent, I think the stories we tell around technology really shape how we think about these new technologies. Going forward, people are going to say, spatial computing, good for enterprise, good for this, and it can make this better, and we can tell it to do this, and AI, it can write your decks that you don't want to do, and all the boring things. No, hold on. Let's put it in a deeper place. Let's put it in a place where we think about our humanity. And look, I know Apple has come out with this announcement, but Steve Jobs is dead, so don't count on Apple. And the new Steve Jobs is probably going to be Asad Malik. That's an inside joke. I think, again, how we think about things, how we do it. I mentioned this book that I really like called Age Proof, because as I age, I want to have positive things about it. There's a really serious study about how we think about our own aging affects how we function. So this talk, instead of Steve Jobs calling computers the bicycle for the mind, it's the bicycle of the heart. And that's how I am thinking about spatial computing. But you might ask, how do we get there? By the way, I could have filled this entire presentation with anti-VR New Yorker cartoons, because there's quite a lot. I like the New Yorker, but calm down, New Yorker, please. So, it reminds me, I'm also a filmmaker. A lot of the French New Wave were critics. They started out criticizing how bad movies were. But at some point, they rolled up their sleeves and they started creating. And that's what I think every critic needs to do now, because it's become a lot easier and a lot more democratic to get to understand what's happening. And I'm saying this because it really is a whole new frontier now. And just as an example, we need new ways to relate to technology. There was a 71 neural net AI that all it had was retina scans of human beings. And with a high degree of accuracy, it could figure out whether that person was a male or a female. It could pick a biological gender from just a retina scan. Now you might say, whoa. And we have no idea how it did it. It's a black box. You can't reverse engineer the reasoning of AI. So we're entering a whole new way of having to not just have critics, but people need to experiment, need to understand, need to create, to change our relationship to technology. We need creative people more than ever. An amazing journalist who, instead of being just a critic, took her adolescent diaries, fed them into GPT-3, and through the chat box function, had a conversation with her inner child. That's beautiful. That's the type of stuff we need. Because we need to get away from the internet. The internet is flat. The internet, spatial computing is going to make things very different. Right now, it's very hard to know all the different information I get, how to react. How do you bear the toll of flicking through devastation and amusement and messaging and everything? I think there's a lot in spatial computing that's going to make things less flat. So this is a bit of the talk where, in a lightning way, I'll just try to give what I think are some standard sort of rules that I think could be really good. I think that's a cliche to think of technology as a tool. I think we need to think of it in existential terms. In Sartre's Humanism and Existentialism, he says, man is not like a hammer. Man's meaning and purpose comes after the very value of his existence. Technology is an extension of us. It is a part of us. It is not something that we're here to use or just to serve us. We have to also realize that a lot of the computers of today, my son, my youngest son, calls our iMac a TV. He's like, TV, And that gets me thinking, because, a lot of computers today use design language of TV. But what about books? What about the role of the imagination? And I bring up Werner Herzog, because Werner, and if you message me, maybe I'll give you Werner Herzog's little notes. I've been able to meet and discuss how he feels about emerging technology. he feels that there's no room for imagination. Where is it? We have to design for it. We have to think about it as things become a lot more intense and interactive. So just as a great example, I know it's one of Peabody, and it deserves it very much. Notes on Blindness really does, it's a VR experience that allows for that abstraction, allows for that moment. And with imagination is empathy. That's what you need, and that's what works. So another way, I think, to make technology more human is to do what humans have been doing since the beginning of time, storytelling. Everyone needs to be a creator. A maker knows more than a critic. And finally, you know, all of this is like a beautiful James Turrell artwork. I don't know how familiar you are, but it's basically cutting open a circle or a frame to look at the sky as you've never seen it before. Technology can really make us connect and see what's already there and augment it and augment our humanity. But I want to finish on one last thing, and this is Herman Narula's book, Virtual Society, is to don't forget our post-human future. I know it sounds sci-fi, but there will be a time where it won't be too far-fetched, and it's an idea in the book that we will have this very difficult ethical dilemma of whether we upload ourselves into a computer and blast it out into the galaxy as the sun explodes behind us. That sounds crazy, but if that is the case, we should make something wonderful. We should make something beautiful. And we should make sure we have a copy of the Unabomber's Manifesto. Thank you.